Hello and good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's webinar. From my point of view, from a very blue sky North London, and I'm hoping that lockdown enables me to have future webinars sitting in the garden rather than sitting in my breakfast room. So, welcome to you, our audience. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you to our guest speakers. I'll introduce in 1 minute for making the time, and also. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. Please do make use of the questions and answers in the chat, and we'll get to as many of those as we can throughout the session. Whilst we're talking about this webinar today, and in fact we're getting close to a year since we all started going on webinars and sitting on Zooms and Teams meetings, and the fact that we wanted today, this next 56, 57 minutes to be really useful to all of you who've come along to listen. And we don't want to be pontificating about the travel industry and when we can start traveling again and where we can go. But it's about getting golden nuggets out of our speakers today to how can we drive travel. So we set the stall out as we're talking about the future of travel. Everybody's been talking about the future of travel. We've set specifically the question, how can brands, businesses, destinations compete as demand surges? My role today is to tease out those nuggets from our speakers here of what can we do differently to really drive engagement, drive sales, to differentiate ourselves, and to help our business to prosper as we come out of lockdown. April the 12th, fantastic day. We can travel in the UK and we can go to self-catering places. May the 17th, UK hotels, B&Bs are open to us, and maybe international travel if Boris allows it. We'll find out about that. So before I introduce the team today, I'm Gary Jacobs. I'm CEO of FKC. We are a marketing, communications and advertising agency. I've been working in the travel industry since 1993. Our core remit is to help our clients to raise their profile through clever creative that drives big results. And hopefully we'll get to talk about some of the things we've been working on both with Chris over the years and with Hamish at OFX. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit very quickly about our speakers today, and then I'll pass over to them. So Tom Hall, most of you will know Tom. Tom is a senior leader from Lonely Planet, a long-time contributor to dozens of publications, including the annual Best in Travel book. Tom is a regular voice covering travel on CNN, BBC News, Sky News, where he's given plenty of advice and context on issues affecting tourism, from volcanic eruptions to economic crises. So great credentials to be able to talk to us today about how we can help people to understand how they can drive travel and meet that demand as it grows. Chris Lee probably needs no introduction, but I'll give you one anyway. Chris is head of marketing at Tourism Authority of Thailand. Has been a client working with FKC for over 10 years, both at Travelmood, tour operator, and at TAT. Chris runs Emotive Travel Marketing, a representation company working with tourist boards from Asia, Australia, and the USA since 2009. Was a chair of PATA, Pacific Asia Travel Association, and still is involved with them today, as well as a number of other organisations he's involved with. Chris, I know, spent a few weeks in Thailand recently, but I think it's probably seen the inside of a hospital in quarantine with COVID rather than actually travelling around enjoying himself. I'm sure we'll hear more about that in a minute. And finally, Hamish Muirs is Senior Currency Strategist and Business Development Manager at OFX, a foreign exchange company, and a client of FKC's. Hamish focuses in particular on risk management and international payment strategies for e-commerce businesses. And the reason for wanting to have Hamish along today is to understand not only the traditional ways that we can drive engagement with our consumers, but a different perspective on how businesses can make money almost while we're sleeping through clever management of foreign exchange. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Tom to introduce yourself, and Tom, just to give a little insight into how you see the industry is going in terms of the opportunities with restrictions lifting and with travel. It's going to be a very noisy marketplace. It's going to be a lot of demand out there, but there's going to be a lot of people clamoring for share of voice and share of wallet. Tom, please tell us a little bit about from your perspective.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you all for having me. I think you set the scene very well there. Crowded and noisy marketplace is probably a good starting point for the conversation, but I think it's well worth keeping customers, passengers very much front of mind in terms of the mindset that people are coming into this with. It looks very much to me that there is possibly a slightly unusual mix at the moment of feeling in a hurry, but not quite sure what to do with that, feeling great excitement, possibly tinged with some nervousness, and approaching a sort of monolithic question of where and when am I going to go? Right. I think the opportunity is also the responsibility of brands here, which is to really harness all of those emotions and help the customer to narrow them down into tangible recommendations and options as quickly and as smoothly as possible. I think if you do that, you're going to go a long way towards assuaging people's concerns and driving bookings. That would be my starting pitch.
Thank you. We'll come back to that. Chris, tell us what the inside of a hospital looks like in Thailand.
I will not spend a lot of time on that, but thanks very much. No, it was a bit of an experience getting over there. Yeah, I just tested for COVID positive on day 4 of my my little stretch in Thailand, and had to go into hospital, but no symptoms, and came through it very well and still in good shape. Thank you very much. Okay, so in terms of us going forward, what are we looking to do? I think so. I represent 5 different tourist boards, but focusing today on Thailand and what we've done, and therefore what we're going to do. I think we are focused on this customer journey that we've been on, and I think if we look at it going back to March, if I may, just very quickly, the customer journey at that point was a stay-at-home message, and so we for Thailand produced a stay-at-home Thai style, and produced a week long of activity, which included Muay Thai fitness classes, home cooking classes from a Thai chef, a well-being course from Healing Holidays, and a Thai hotel called Chivasom, which were helping us there. So we did all these sort of activities which reflected how the customer was feeling at the time. So going along that journey with the customer, understanding what they're doing, and also what we've constantly done is ask them how they're feeling and ask them about their input, and that set us up well, I think, for when we go forward. So what we're looking to do now is say, because they're very practical things. Tom's right. There's almost like kids going, "Where do we go? Where do we go? What do we do?" But I think behind that, the first thing is going to be a very practical thing. Is actually where can we go and when. That will be the first sort of thing we've got to do. So from a destination point of view, it's going to be very important for us to communicate quickly when they can start to come to our destination. So giving the customers plenty of notice is important. And then addressing different types of customers, because they're certainly not all the same. I think some customers will just be desperate to go. We need to reflect that messaging. So just giving them practical information for how to do so. But some customers will need some more reinsurance, and we need to match those products with them. So what types of products in Thailand will match the different sort of places that people find themselves on that customer journey?
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'd like to come back a little bit, in a little bit, just to talk about those key messages that you're going to actually deliver to those people that have maybe considered Thailand in the past, but not yet, or those who have been before and just want to go again. So we'll come back on that, if I may. Hamish, please tell us a little bit about OFX and your role, and particularly in the travel sector.
Yeah, so morning, guys. Hamish Miras. I work for OFX as one of the senior currency strategists, as Gary mentioned. And part of my role and remit is I work alongside UK, European businesses and travel businesses, managing the foreign currency payments and that foreign currency risk. So OFX, we're a publicly listed FX and international payments company, headquartered down in Sydney. And we've been working in the travel sector for a number of years now. We have a number of clients that we speak to a lot, and so we've got quite a good grasp as to what they're doing and what they're looking at. And one of the key messages I think Tom mentioned it earlier on, is just having the customer at the heart of their operations and their thoughts as things begin to open back up. And with that, as we sort of talked about earlier as well, is that flexibility. Obviously, there's still a bit of nervousness and uncertainty. So customers want that flexibility. They want a few different options of when they can travel and where they can travel. And we're seeing that in terms of the conversations we have directly with travel businesses trickle down to what they're requesting from us. So if you've got a large base of customers who want that flexibility, then you need to be looking at ways to add those sort of questions and problems into your business as well. And for us, it's constant conversations as Hamish, can I have flexibility on the way I manage my foreign currency? Can I have flexibility on the forward contracts and the hedging that I do? Hamish, can we extend the contracts that we have in place? And so we're having this trickle down effect from the customers at the top. They're the most important people here, through to the travel businesses, and then through into kind of what we do as well. So I think that's the main thing that customers want, and one of the major themes in the market that we're seeing at the moment.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back in a while just to talk about how you can cleverly manage your risk. And I think when we spoke a while ago, you talked about minimizing losses, and obviously people want to make profit. So a bit interesting topic just to come back on. But if I can then just come back to primarily to Tom and Chris, and if you have a point on a view on this, please, Hamish, do jump in. But from a marketing point of view, for any brand, any destination, any company, any organization, to understand the why I should buy from you, why I should travel to your destination, to be able to differentiate yourself, to be able to speak with an authentic tone of voice and avoid the homogenization of pure advertising, where if you cover the logo up, you have no idea who you're buying from, whether it's an airline or whether it's a destination. How do you see the time is now presenting itself, whether we're pressing a reset button because everybody's starting from almost the same level, apart from the fact that some people have got big budgets and some have got smaller budgets, so they have to be that much more clever. How do you see that you can articulate your brand messaging to really cut through and maximize spend and minimize wastage and get the connection that you want as a brand to get that customer to come and buy from you?
Well, I can start with a few thoughts on that. For me, I think it's partly about interpreting the demands and the needs of the customer. And Chris is correct to say that there's different types of customers, and they will have different wants and different needs. That said, I do think there are some broad trends that are worth bearing in mind. The first is everybody has been away from international travel for a long time, and I think that the majority of people, the vast majority, will have missed it. This isn't commuting that we're talking about here, where there's plenty of people saying, "Oh, well, I could take or leave," getting on the train and going into the office every day. This is something that people genuinely love doing. That said, with that small sense of possible uncertainty, if you haven't stepped through an airport for a year or more, then I think it's understandable that people might gravitate towards comforting experiences, whether that's something that feels familiar about your destination or your product. And I would consider putting that quite at the heart of what you have. And indeed, whether it's something which puts an additional stress on the privacy that's being offered, i.e. taking people away from crowds. I think the idea of going back to cities is one that is going to be attractive, but it will take a little bit more time for that to happen. So there's a few thoughts there, I think, about broad trends that can feed into things.
So if I go back, we had a conversation the other day, and my promise to our audience is I want to tease out nuggets from you guys, golden nuggets that they can use. Go back to their desk and say, I hadn't thought about doing that. That's one thing I can do. So let's just stick with that for the moment. Because when we spoke the other day, you talked about a roller coaster ride that we're going through at the moment. And I always remember the analogy, when you're going downhill, all you're doing is picking up speed to get back up the other side. And we're all seeing this potential turn. You spoke about very bold emotional approach and emotional tools. You talked about technology and use of apps. particularly in the places where those destinations like Venice and Amsterdam, where over tourism was a real problem. Now, what could we be doing to really so those destinations will have reclaimed their streets, but they lost all of the income they get from tourism. So just sort of talk about this, the very bold emotional tools and the technological aspect of how can people start to harness these to make a difference to their own sales and marketing efforts.
Well, if I take our experience at Lonely Planet, and I think I would put this out as a suggestion about being very bold and very intentional about the emotional pull of travel and the emotional pull of the world. We approach things with an absolutely unabashed sense of wonder about the world, and the thought that we haven't been able to really explore that for over a year, that adds to that intensity. So that's one thing, certainly, in terms of imagery, in terms of messaging, in terms of overall approach. I think the whole travel industry will benefit from selling itself, as it were. I think the point about technology for me, it comes partly from visits to Vienna and Venice that I was fortunate enough to do last summer, where it felt like some of the things that were already in place from a technological point of view to anticipate people's concerns in destination about management of crowds, about pre-booking for really big attractions that maybe you'd have had to join a really long queue for in the past, about wrapping all of that up into a city app which maybe covers public transport as well. I think those things exist in a lot of places now, and it's about including that in the messaging about how we can reduce friction in the journey and in the in-destination experience.
Okay, so just go back and give me one thing in there that I can write on my piece of paper that I can go back with today to say, great, if I do this, it's going to help me drive my business forward. Is it the use of apps, or what do you see as a key takeout from that?
I think it's about being very intentional about the emotional pull of travel. Make sure that you include an emotional travel is wonderful message and my destination is wonderful in what you do, without being homogenized as we all know that travel is wonderful. How can I make this relate to my brand and my product, whether I'm a tour operator or a travel agent or an airline or a destination? I've got to give those emotive messages of why choose me. Yeah. And that is key. So absolutely. And it should be specific to your brand and your destination, obviously. Thank you. So Chris, in terms of how you would relate that to Thailand, I know that you were having pretty good numbers coming up to pre-COVID. I think you were something like one person off a million, and COVID dashed that in the flick of an eye. Getting the numbers back, what's the messaging that you want to put forward that's different from what you did before? I talked about pressing the reset button. We know that you do weddings and honeymoons, you do adventure, and that you do gastronomy, etc., etc. How are you going to change the messaging to make people come back to you rather than go elsewhere?
Well, in some ways, we're not necessarily changing from what we were trying to do before, because we had recognized before COVID that there was the drive for just mass numbers with was not the way we wanted to go. We wanted to drive down a much more quality tourism approach, targeting specific groups of people with specific requirements, which we thought we could do well with. So whether it be luxury customers or customers with well-being, or the gastro was again quite a big thing for us, developing food tourism, gastro tourism. I think it's important for us. So I think we were sort of going down that route anyway. I think, and typical that Tom's really pinched, I think, probably what I was going to say, but I'll put it a slightly different way, is that he's right. This emotional, I could call it a tactile. I think people we miss tactile. We miss the tactile nature of meeting each other, of seeing each other, and bringing that tactile nature of travel, I think, is really important. And I think the challenge of that sometimes in terms of a pure marketing thing is how do we do that? So the way I see, for instance, I see digital marketing as being a very good way of tailoring messages, key messages to different types of customers, which is important to me, because I said before, I don't think we've got one message for one group of people. But I do think that things like print DM, for instance, print direct mail, is a really good way of bringing a much more emotional response to our marketing. So actually having a tactile thing to read and to inspire, I think is going to be important. So I think it's very important for us to reflect that customer sentiment, that customer requirement to have something tactile by reflecting that in our marketing ourselves.
It's an interesting point there, Chris, because we've had a question came in a couple of days ago from Lisa Fitzel, who you know well, Managing Director at Elegant Resorts and If Only. And Lisa asked for all of the panelists, how do you see marketing trends changing post-COVID? And I think you tapping in there into the tactile direct marketing rather than the plethora of email marketing that we all get, and some of us trying to ignore it and some of us actually respond to it if it's relevant. How do you see that what you're going to be doing is going to change? So are you saying that you're going to spend more money in direct, so far more targeted marketing?
Yeah, I'll be encouraging our partners as well to look at that tactile nature, because we're looking for standout marketing. As I said, the advantage of digital can be consistency, and quantity is an easy win, particularly in the months that we've had in the past, where keeping in contact with our customers was the biggest win. That was the most important thing. Those destinations that talked about going dark, I never understood. But going forward, and I'll pay compliment to Lisa as she put the question in, you know, she produced an amazingly beautiful, sexy guide of Thailand and food guide last year, which was just beautiful. And it really did inspire. And you couldn't do that in the same way, in my opinion, with a digital form of promotion. So I think there is a real case for having a standout activity where we play to that need for tactile.
Thank you. There's a question just come in which sort of taps into this as well. It's from an anonymous attendee. What about the demands and the needs of the destination communities? This is very much for you, Chris, but Tom, you may have a perspective on this. Shouldn't we consider prioritising those products that support the destinations on which our industry depends, which have been as if not more devastated by COVID as a travel industry in general? Again, I want to bring that back to if we're looking at supporting the communities, what the messaging is, the key messaging that you would deliver to your consumers to say, consider us because of what we do for local communities. How does that sit with you, Chris, in terms of opportunities for Thailand?
Okay, I'm going to do a plug. I can't help myself because I'm also chairman of trustees of a thing called Charitable Travel, which is a charity set up whereby if you book your holiday, then you can nominate a percentage of that holiday to go towards a project which supports communities which have been affected by tourism stopping. So I think that's a very practical way in which we do. So I think, you know, by just tourism coming back, we will benefit those communities. But again, I think it wasn't that we weren't doing this before. We have had community-based tourism before, and I think it will be certainly even more important. But yeah, for me, it's a very practical way of contributing. And I suppose it's about, and that's one of the challenges it's going to be, you see, is that tourism at its best supporting local communities is when we spend the money in those communities. So very, very simple example. If you spend all your money buying, having meals in your internationally owned hotel, you won't be having quite the same impact as if you're going out along the street and eating in a nice little restaurant along the road or on the beach as well. So those are the differences in terms of how it benefits local communities, very practical differences.
Okay, so again, coming back to messaging and helping people to tell stories, we know that advertising generally is successful when you keep it really sharp. If you're doing an ad, you probably want to get one key objective over, one key message over, so you're not confusing your target market. But we know now that we've got obviously so many channels, digital, where you can start to tell stories. You talk about direct marketing. Key is how you address those specific markets, and you have quite a few in Thailand in terms of different demographic across from young travellers to families. Will you be doing anything different in terms of how you tell your stories? Or you said before you're going to pretty well do what you've been doing in the past, maybe in a different way through targeting?
I think more so. I mean, I think putting the local people, putting the Thai people who are going to be affected by this tourism front and centre in the warm welcome back. Again, making that personal connection, I think, will be really important. So, yes, asking them to tell their stories about the sort of things that they haven't been able to do because they've missed tourism.
So we're talking there about an emotional strategy.
Correct.
That will drive that engagement. And again, why buy from me? Because I've actually got a story to tell, and I'm not just trying to flog a seat on a plane or a head in the bed. So I think that emotional messaging is quite key. And it comes back to the overall objectives of what we set when we're writing communications briefs or creative briefs for a campaign. Is why am I telling this story? Why should people believe in me? What's the differentiating factor in my messaging to the consumer? Okay, I think I've got that one. Thank you. If you then switch from that emotional to the rational, Hamish, will come back to you about how an organisation can improve their bottom line, how they can use clever foreign exchange management and risk. I know it's moving from a very emotive subject of holidays and excitement, but we're talking with businesses here who have been losing money and they want to make as much money going forward as possible for sustainability purposes. Tell us a little bit about how a good foreign exchange company can help companies to achieve that.
Yeah, well, just before that, Gary, I just want to touch upon that kind of emotive side. And I know that you helped us out with this campaign. I was crazy last year. Real people here to help. So it's not just we do often sell product, but it's a service as well. And it's having that communication, the ability to pick up the phone and speak to anyone. And I think that real people here to help mantra can be applied to loads of businesses, like foreign exchange company, to a travel company as well. But in terms of your question on how travel companies can manage that risk, well, the first thing is ask yourself a series of questions. Where am I sending my customers? Do I have budgeted levels in place? Do I know what my cash flow forecasts look like? And then you can begin to build a risk management strategy around that. And we talked about, and we touched upon the other week, how we work with owners of MDs, CEOs, FDs, with the priority being to minimize losses and manage the volatility and the uncertainty of the foreign exchange market. But I think what my message would be to travel companies at the moment is risk management isn't just booking forward contracts and hedging portions of your expected foreign currency exposures. Risk management is much more encompassing. It's way larger than that. And I think 2020 really taught a lot of businesses and a lot of travel businesses those truths. So risk management is everything that happens beforehand and afterwards. So it's having good two-way dialogue with your bank or your FX company or FX partner. It's having clear conversations around deposit terms and margin call terms. Obviously, it might be booking forward contracts and hedging tools in the middle. And then it's, what are you doing with those afterwards as well? It's those two-way conversations.
Hamish, does it matter whether I'm a multi-million-pound organisation, tour operator, airline, cruise company who are trading, or whether I'm a smaller high street shop still selling and buying foreign exchange? Because obviously I'm buying in one currency and selling in another.
No, it doesn't matter. We work alongside, with the full breadth of UK and European SMEs. So it could be a company turning over a small foreign currency exposure each year, or it could be, multinational, airline that is exposed to dozens, if not 50 plus currencies, which is often the case. But what I'd say is that foreign currency is inherent to travel businesses if they've got customers overseas, or they're lucky enough to be sending their customers abroad to Europe, to the US, to Southeast Asia. It always seems to be a problem for travel businesses and the heart of travel businesses. And it doesn't matter if you're a massive player or tiny. If you're not managing correctly, it can make a big difference and a big bite to your bottom line at the end of the year.
Okay, so I think the key message here is that we've got a very diverse audience today, from CEOs to CMOs and so on, owner managed companies. that whilst marketing is key to get engagement with consumers and sales, there is a good way to ensure that you're maximising the return on your investment by having the right foreign exchange company supporting you.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, so if I had to pick out something that's really useful, and I appreciate that Tom and Chris have done this, so I'll hang my hat as well. So things like limit orders are fantastic tool that is really, really underutilized, especially in the travel sector at the moment. So I was just telling the story that the foreign exchange market, 60% of, or it's over 60% of foreign exchange is managed through London. Not a huge surprise, and it's not been too disrupted by Brexit in the start of the year. That means, though, when banks, investors, myself, you guys all go home at the end of the day at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, go back to your kitchens or sofa, there's less liquidity in the market, but there's obviously still players in New York, in Asian trading hubs as well, still managing, buying, selling vast quantities of foreign exchange. But because there's less liquidity, you can often see bigger swings. That's really often the case on Sunday evenings when Asian markets open up. They open up on a Sunday evening, but obviously the UK businesses aren't up and running. We can see these swings in clients' favour. Limit orders are a fantastic tool because they're essentially electronic orders. Our clients pick the rate of exchange they want to buy and sell at, and if we see through this extra volatility those rate of exchange hit, it's a great tool to improve those average rate of exchange across the year. And that's where the differences can really be made, improving those average rates of exchange across the year. And limit orders, really simple, effective tool at doing that. It was just, and the reason I mention it is I just think that they're completely underutilized by travel businesses at the moment. So it's just one of the things that we are seeing become more and more popular.
Before I switch from the rational back to the emotional aspects of travel, I just want to ask a question that's popped up here in the chat about how you're delivering flexibility to your customers and how important is it right now in your view?
So from a FX management point of view, one of the flexibilities we're talking more and more about is around deposit terms, cash flow, margin call terms, forward contracts, flexibility, the ability to draw down on those contracts whenever you want, the ability to roll those contracts. Those two last parts in particular are really relevant at the moment because it's what it trickles down from the customers, as I mentioned at the start. If you've got a load of bookings for customers, say in September, but the whole profile gets shifted back and you need to roll those bookings, well, you need to roll your forward contracts as well, and you want to have that level of flexibility built into your financial products as well, and the ability to utilize them early or extend them is a great one for companies to have.
Okay, thank you. And I know that in previous conversation, I think Chris, you alluded to the fact that in a previous life in working in a tour operator, foreign exchange was a massive contributor to your profitability. So it's something that if I'm sure most FDs and CFOs will always have their eye on foreign exchange, but there's always potential way to increase margin by dealing with the right company. And OFX obviously is one of those people to talk to because you can talk to somebody rather than some of the banks that you can't get hold of. Okay, I just want to switch, Tom, to a question that came in a day or so ago from Patricia Baldini, Senior Brand Manager for Liberty Wines. And she asked the fact she's interested in understanding what is the future of travel in Europe for business reasons as well as for holidays, in particular with a focus on enogastronomic travels. And I have to admit that I had to look up what enotourism was all about, and it is food and wine tourism, and which is obviously high in a lot of people's minds. I think our intake of wine and alcohol over the last year has increased hugely, and appreciation of wines probably, and therefore the opportunity to travel and discover wines in destination with great food is going to be probably high on people's agenda. So what do you think in that respect, particularly about Europe?
So I think that the very first thing to note is that the picture as it comes to travel broadly in Europe is evolving almost day by day. You know, I could see Madeira and the Canary Islands dropping requirements, which have been very stringent, including testing for vaccinated travellers. I think as those things continue to form, I think that's a big part of the question around travel in Europe over the course of this summer. When it comes specifically to a niche, even a very big niche, I mean, gastrotourism is a massive niche, and it encompasses a lot of things. I think that it feeds into some of the trends that we can expect to play very well with people when they're thinking about booking. So the idea that you may go on an agritourism farm stay, that you may go to some restaurants in more remote locations, that you might go and visit vineyards, self-guided tours, that kind of thing. I think they would all be very well placed for recovery. Interesting thing about COVID in the past year is that it has been an accelerator of existing trends. And I think the urge to take what is an interest in food and wine and turn it into something which becomes a real part of your lifestyle is something that has grown a lot. You know, I know so many people who have done virtual tastings, who have learnt to cook things that they haven't been doing before, doing virtual classes. I think the desire to take that out on the road is going to be a big part of the next few months. And I haven't even talked about business tourism because I should let someone else speak.
So I think the key thing again comes back to what I've been saying all along, is about the messaging. It's about the differentiator. So if you are a destination that's got fantastic food and wines, then that's the messaging you've got to get out to your potential audience, and particularly with an emphasis on clever targeting. So once you know whether it's a 55-year-old couple that loves their food, loves their wine, loves Europe, how do you get to those people in a clever way? And that's the part of the advertising industry's remit, is to be able to do the targeting to match the prospect of, where it goes back to what you were saying before, Chris, about direct marketing as a way of actually getting to people. And we've all seen, and I still get it, I get dozens of brochures landing on my doorstep years after I actually approached a particular company, and they're still targeting me. So I think the clever way is actually making sure that you're talking to people at the right time, in the right way, in the right tone of voice, when they have the highest propensity to buy, not when they've already bought and they've buggered off and done something, they're doing something else now. Excuse my language. Cool. There's a question that's come in, which again, Chris, you mentioned this before. We're not here to talk generically about what's happening in travel and when restrictions are going to be lifted and so on, because it's a bit of a moving feast on some things, apart from kids going back to school today, and there's lots of champagne corks popping because their kids are no longer dancing around their feet. But I'll read this question. It's from Christina Harlow. How do you anticipate promoting destinations and holidays when the reality is we have no idea which countries UK consumers will be allowed to travel to this summer? Will not be open for everyone. Given the UK is now way ahead in terms of vaccines, how are you going to adapt to this? And again, this is an open question, but I think it's this whole thing about getting your message across in a cogent way that actually engages with a consumer. So, okay, I might not be able to travel for 6 months or 12 months, but how do I get Thailand or any destination, Tom, that you might think of, into my heart, where I say, yes, I've got this cemented into my neurolinguistic programming to say, I want to go to Croatia. And I say that because I had a great gastronomic experience a few years ago to have that experience. So it's, yes, we don't know where we're going to be able to travel to. We don't know exactly when we're going to be able to go. But in terms of you spending your money, your hard-earned money and your hard-earned budgets on getting people to engage, when we don't know what's happening, what's your advice to our audience to say, you can't just sit back on your hands and wait. You've still got to be doing something now to get that engagement. Long-winded question. Apologies.
Okay. I mean, I think it's a very pertinent question, because the biggest conversation really going on with destinations at the moment is, dare I say, to follow the example of the UK government a little bit, which is that destinations have been nervous about committing to when they should open up, particularly in the short term. But actually what the customer wants to see is just some idea of when they can expect it, subject to whatever loops that we've got to jump through, as it were. And so actually said that the roadmap that was produced by the UK government, we're looking for other countries to flip the other side of that. So, you know, it's not about, you know, will we be open for Thailand, for instance? Are we going to be open in July? Are we going to be open in October? Whatever we're going to do, we should be announcing as soon as possible those dates so that we give maximum chance, because the customers basically aren't now looking to book until they have some certainty about when they know that they can actually go. So I think this is a very important sort of thing. It's not a marketing thing, it's a thing that we just have to get over. In the absence of that, honestly, I think we have to tailor back our marketing. So at the moment, give you an example, I was sent a little destination video that one of my clients had done a couple of days ago, and it was very nice. And they said, well, can you send it out? And I said, but what for? Because it wasn't actually doing anything, because it wasn't linked to a message of when I can go or what I can do. So I think this is a very important thing, and I do hope, and I know that certainly with at least a couple of my destinations, they're working on this, we will see announcements, even if that announcement is, you know, we won't be accepting people in until October, and we won't be accepting them in unless they've got vaccinations. If we know that, once we know that, then we've got something we can go with.
This is an interesting one, because to me, there's a question here about brand advertising, brand marketing, and tactical sales conversion. Because I hear it time and time again that a client will say, we want to increase our exposure, we want to get our brand to be more well known, we need to increase our profile, and we'll put together a campaign. We'll look at TV advertising, we'll look at radio, we'll look at press, whatever it may be. And then there always comes and also we've got to have sales conversion to be able to offset the cost of doing the marketing. Now, there's two different aspects to that, of driving the barometer of your brand and pushing the awareness up, which is great, because greater awareness comes greater propensity to sell. Again, actual tactical sales. So in terms of at that point where we talk about this question of, well, we don't know when we can travel, we don't know where we can travel. We think we know now when, post May the 17th, hopefully Boris is going to tell us yet, you can jump on planes now. But it's that, how do I determine what I'm going to spend on my brand and what I'm going to spend my pure tactical conversion? Because I can't do the tactical conversion at the moment if I'm a little unsure about, if I spend my money on an airline or on a hotel, how easy am I going to get it back if I have to cancel? Whereas if I'm building my brand profile, I'm just trying to get that message into the hearts and minds of the consumer, so when the time is right, they'll want to spend. How do you juxtapose those two aspects? And again, I'll throw that to both you, Chris and Tom.
Gary, if I may, I won't make a judgment about what point in a marketing cycle you would choose to flip from one to the other at the moment, apart from to suggest that you know, flexibility would seem to be very key in that, and indeed nimbleness. And the parallel that I would draw is just how good I think airlines were last summer at being able to meet demand very quickly. Now, if an airline can suddenly say, okay, right, we can get British people to the Canaries at short notice, I would expect that you know, we can work out when to be putting our messages out and in what format. The interesting thing that we saw at Lonely Planet, and we've seen it right through this, and it is this roller coaster of interest in terms of search terms, in terms of where traffic is going. It goes in waves, and for us, it started with this almost you know, ghoulish view of, what are all these destinations shutting down in the world? All these places I love are all shutting down. Then it went into, I miss the notion of travel. How can I experience them virtually? How can, you know, what ways can I bring them into, you know, into my life? And then it became, I'm just sick of that. We're not going to be able to travel again. And now what we see is a real emphasis in both, you know, social engagement and just general traffic and time on site, read-throughs of articles and videos, etc., in saying, okay, this destination is doing this right now. And I'd really back up Chris's point about that. If you in a week's time or 2 weeks time or 3 weeks time have to do something different, it is okay, because people are still spending a bit of time consuming information about your destination and forming that bond that we're talking about again. I would expect the next part of that wave to be the first people back. Maybe they are influencers, maybe they are travelers, maybe they're people from another country, maybe they're Brits, because we do get to make the jump on some other countries. But their experiences in destination are then going to be absolutely pivotal. And I would suggest combining those with the voices of local people. And I think that does bring in this question about, how do you communicate the community benefit of tourism? There are some really nice stories to be told there, and I suggest telling them from the perspective of the hosts.
So recognizing that there are consumers out there that are ready and waiting to buy, whether they're ready to actually stick their money or pay their money now, but it's about how you engage with those people. So tell the stories, get the messages out there. And this, I think, again, comes back to the difference between the brand advertising and the tactical advertising spend. If the budgets are smaller and you only want to be spending when the money is going to flow across your platform, then really it's a game, isn't it? Of when do I go and actually spend the money, rather than I'm going to spend money now building the profile, and when the time is right, hopefully convert some of that interest into sales. So it's, again, telling the right stories at the right time. There's an interesting question that's just come in, which I love the starting of it. Forgetting COVID for a second. Hallelujah. Let's forget COVID for 1 second. Diversity and equity and inclusion has become a key societal concern over the past year, and particularly in the past 24 hours. How can travel brands and destinations up their game in this regard? And I would bring it back to, if we think about the question in terms of what can we do specifically through messaging to up the game, how can travel brands and destinations really up their game in this area? Chris, do you have a thought on this?
Tom, you go first.
Well, the example that I would give, and by the way, this is a fantastic question, and it's completely right. If you took COVID out of the equation, like, this would be the story in travel from I believe, and indeed in society generally, not just because the last 24 hours, so that has put it all into very stark contrast. At Lonely Planet last year, we actually decided that we weren't going to run our regular Best in Travel awards in the way that we had done for the past 5 or 6 years, which was simply to say, here are great countries, cities and regions that you can visit next year that have got a great topical reason to do so. And we kind of swept that away, partly because we couldn't tell that story, but also because we felt that there was a different one worth telling. And instead we looked at places, communities and organizations who were really putting a spotlight on these areas, inclusion, on community, and also on sustainable travel. It gave us the chance to bring different voices forward. I know I sort of said that in the answer to my previous question, so I won't dwell on it too much. But just to recognize that I think in the past the travel industry has been guilty of putting forward a singularity of voice, and I think finding different perspectives and giving them the floor to tell stories about destinations that they either live in or they travel to is the fundamental challenge that we have as a business. It's also a great opportunity, but it's a journey that we're on. We're certainly not there with it. I don't think anybody is. But recognizing that and putting it at the forefront of any planning that we do around content is just absolutely key and critical.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think to add to that, Gary, I'd say that for me, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, these are messages which are not one-offs, and they can't just suddenly happen. And people are often quite savvy to this. So if you're not consistent in your messaging about this, you're getting yourself into a lot of trouble. So not just when it suddenly suits us to invite a diverse audience, you have to show credibility through consistency of that messaging. That has to be nothing to do with COVID, before, during or after. It's consistency that matters with this. Otherwise you won't be taken seriously, and that's a real negative for your brand.
and it's also about having relevance, isn't it? It's about having relevance of why you're giving that messaging in the first place, and what it means to the brand. So if this is actually a consider us as a company to buy from or go on holiday with, that particular messaging has just got to be there as support, almost, whether it's CSR or whether it's a part of the key message. But it can't be a bit like the old greenwashing. It can't just be used as we're good over here because we actually embrace it. It has to be a why. Why are you doing this in the first place? I think, again, it's about storytelling. I just want to just move on to this question very, very briefly, because it does go into slightly more of the generic area. With most government advice recommending and sometimes legislating that gathering in social or business groups is to be avoided at best and occasionally illegal at worst, could this make group travel a major casualty in the recovery of tourism? I'm more interested in this last point. Does this mean that small is the new big? And again, we're not here just to talk generically about travel. We're here to talk about how we can help drive business, or help businesses to drive their engagement and their sales and profitability. But this whole thing about is small the new big is quite interesting. And I don't know, in terms of business travel, what the effect of GDP is to any country. It's different, obviously, for each region. But is small the new big? Is it? Are we talking about smaller groups of traveling? I mean, we're all used now to very, very small. I've been sitting in this house with my wife for a long time, just the two of us. Kids come home now and again, but yeah, it's part of our lives now. So I don't mean to confuse the question, but
I'll have a go at that one. I think when it comes to business travel, and I suppose thinking about the different elements of business travel, conferences and events, essential meetings, one-to-one visits, there's different dimensions to it. It's going to take time for us to get back to things like large scale conferences. I think hybrid business travel conference model is going to be with us for a while. Businesses would take the opportunity to understandably scrutinize their travel budgets if they've been able to function very well, and other institutions as well. I would probably give it a short answer, which is that small is the new big for a while. I don't believe that the desire that there would be a permanent shift away from either conferences and events and group travel for leisure. I just think it would take slightly longer to get back to those things.
I totally agree with that. In just a very simple personal example, whereby I had one staff get together last August. It was sort of in between, and the joy of everybody coming together could not be replicated online. So we'd been virtually meeting regularly, but again, it goes back to that sort of the power of the tactile. I don't think we should underestimate that, but it's absolutely, Tom is right. It's not it's suddenly going to happen, or it's suddenly going to change back. It's going to be evolution, but the hybrid is here to stay. The power of the tactile is definitely the way forward, I think, but backed up by the consistency of the digital communication, the virtual communication. So now you've got the two, whereas before it was probably a lot more emphasis on probably more tactile, but now we have less tactile, but it's more important to us when we do it, but then supported by some really good, more consistent virtual meetup.
Okay, thank you. So we're getting into the last 5 minutes. I'm just going to read out one last question, and I'd ask you in your summary of key nuggets that we can give to our audience, and then just final thoughts that you have. The question is, how has research of changing consumer habits, if you have any or know of any, affected your thinking for future travel growth? And again, I think this has to come back into the context of what we've learned about what's happened over the last year or so, and how it's going to affect the way that we're all traveling, how we're engaging with our decision making of where we're going to go. Going back to the Thailand of the profile of your demographic, whether you're going to see more families traveling together, or whether it's still going to be smaller family units, whatever it may be. Has research taught you guys anything that you're going to change? It's going to make you change your behaviours. No, okay, thank you for that one.
I would say not so much research, and the reason for that is that actually, as an organisation, Lonely Planet hasn't done a huge amount of consumer research over the past few months. You know, it's been through change of ownership, it's been doing different things. It's coming back to that now, but we do obviously keep an incredibly close eye on our traffic patterns and what they tell us about user intent coming to the site. One thing that it tells us is that you know, demand and interest can come back really quite quickly. You know, you can track it directly to, for instance, some of the comments that that have been made in the UK government level, and you know, we're a global business, so Australia and the US, you know, it's very responsive to that. So keeping a very close eye on that, that's kind of an obvious point, because I'm sure lots of people are. But I think the other thing is that there is interest in experiences that was there pre-COVID. Now, COVID may have been an accelerator of trends, but some of the things that were there pre-COVID, whether it's around gastronomy, the outdoors, you know, traveling by train, activities, they were all things that were there before, and when the interest comes back, it comes back with some of those filters on it as well.
Thank you, guys. We've got just over 3 minutes, so if I can ask each one of you just to summarise any thinking for today, if you can think of or remember any key nugget of information which we can impart to our audience. Chris, you're my top left of my screen, so I'm going to naturally choose you to start.
Thanks. I think for me, it's all about the customer journey that we have. So walking with our customer, understanding what their customer sentiment is at those parts in that journey. So it's not a sudden leap from one thing to another. It's an evolving journey, which we've got to keep in touch with the customer, keep asking them what they want, keep listening to them, and then inspiring them. And I think that for me, it's the two forms of marketing which really stand out, which is the advantages of the consistency of digital marketing, and the inspiration of the tactile marketing, which I believe it still has a really important place.
Thank you, Hamish. Thank you, Chris. Hamish.
Yeah, I think the important things, and what we've noticed that customers want, is they want that engagement with them, that two-way engagement, and they want that communication. Obviously, last year there was a lot of cancellations, so I think the importance of just like a customer service team is really, really relevant these days, and that's come back to the fore. And then I think the other one, which I mentioned earlier, is that customers want that flexibility, businesses want that flexibility, and businesses should be speaking and asking their vendors, their providers, their banks, their mothers, their wives for that flexibility as well. Like just building that into your business and into your what you're selling as much as possible, I think it'll be key over the next 12, 24 months, and then moving beyond that as well.
Thank you, Hamish. And finally, Tom.
Yeah, I would just recommend just doubling down on that unabashed sense of wonder about the world that is out there, that people are now really, really starting to get excited about, because they can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you. And from my point of view, thank you, Tom. For me, picking up on what everybody's been saying, it's about targeting, telling the right stories, telling you why you should choose me as your destination, as your brand, as your company to book with. Differentiation, stand out from the crowd, authenticity of the story and the message, and really make sure that you are going to market at the right time, spending your money in the most appropriate way, looking for the best return on investment possible. Panel, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been insightful, it's been interesting, it's been entertaining, not talking generically, but trying to focus in and hone in on key deliverables that will help all of our businesses to strive, thrive, and succeed post the 17th of May. Thank you very much indeed.